Hi, and welcome to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm your host, Ray Treverson from OTG Capital. We broadcast locally on Radio Northern Beaches and around Australia on the Community Radio Network. We also go out on Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and a whole range of broadband, multicast, whatever. And this week, I'm really pleased to have at the microphone a new guest. We have Michelle Griffiths, who is a partner in TAG Financial Services. Michelle is a financial planner and a chartered accountant. One of those rare beasts, I have to say, that an accountant and a financial planner. So welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thank you, Ray. I appreciate you having me join the show. And you're right, it is a little bit different being an accountant and financial advisor, and it's interesting the different hats that I wear as a result of that, because in my view, or in our view, we always think about strategy first, and there's a lot of elements of that that kind of come with the accounting knowledge and the tax knowledge and superannuation legislation, what have you, that kind of spans both specialties, if you like. So being able to have that all wrapped up in one can sometimes be really useful and strategic.
Well, I must also say one of my regular contributors to the show is a lady called Philippa Hunt. She's Melbourne-based these days, and she runs a website called Wise Girls Money Academy. And so she's all about educating predominantly middle-aged and older women that unfortunately go through divorce and separation and financial stress. If I make a broad-based assumption here, please excuse me, but being female, do you find that women will seek you out because I guess there's an ability for them to be able to relate to you better than, say, a man in this sphere?
Yeah, it's interesting that I think that there are some that will. There's some that, as long as they're feeling respected, they don't care who they talk to. But there does seem to be a predisposition in a lot of instances. And I think it actually, unfortunately, comes from them having some bad experiences in the past, and particularly in the situation that you've just mentioned, where they're coming out of a divorce, or in a situation where maybe they've lost their husband prematurely, let's say, or even of an old age. It's not uncommon for, particularly those older relationships where it might be that the man has been taking the lion's share of the financial decisions over the journey. And unfortunately, we see a lot of circumstances where the wife, if you like, has almost been treated as a handbag and hasn't actually been a party to the decisions along the way, and therefore hasn't actually received the financial education. And then they're left in this position of feeling completely overwhelmed because there's, number one, I'll call it the loss associated with either the death or the death of the marriage, and having to learn or understand and having things talk to them where they don't even understand the jargon, let alone some of the concepts. So, it was interesting, I was reading the other day that I think it was something like 90% of women who have a financial planner, if you like, or an accountant in their life before their husband passed away, change in the first 12 months. And I think that's actually a really interesting blight on the fact that the women haven't felt heard throughout the journey. And I think that's one of the things that we take pride in, is making sure that both parties in the relationship are actually a party to the decisions. You might have one of the party that, one of the spouses that is more active and more interested in the detail, but there's big picture stuff that both of them need to be on top of and know that this is a path to what we want. And sometimes it's really interesting. One of the techniques we sometimes use is to actually ask a new client when they're coming in, hey, which of you usually takes the front with these types of discussions? And, quite often the fella will put his hand up and say, yes, I'm the one who makes most of the financial decisions, and the wife sort of nods along, and that's great. And then we say, that's fantastic. Okay, well, we want to hear from her first. So you'll get your chance to speak, but we want to hear from her first. And it's a really interesting technique, because what it actually does is it actually means that she has to step up to the plate and actually say what she wants and what's important to her. And the amount of times that the husband has sort of sat back on his haunches a little bit and sort of gone, oh, hang on, look, you never mentioned to me that was important to you. So it's
Mm.
actually a really interesting process in actually getting both people engaged in the process, because yes, the techniques might be very technical, but it's actually about human issues and what do we want our futures to look like and what's important to us. They're human issues.
Very much
So
so. And I
it's
guess one of the big indicators I always look for when I have just general discussions ends up becoming what the relative super balances are of the husband and the wife. That's always a pretty darn good indicator. But anyway, we digress. Look, one of the reasons why I wanted you to come on the show today, there's always a multitude of things that we can be talking about. But one of the things that strikes up a chord with me, and as you and I both are holders of our own respective financial services licenses, one of the things we get challenged with from a compliance perspective is people asking us to do unnatural acts. Now, ladies and gents, don't start thinking anything otherwise that's not triple X that I'm talking about. I'm simply talking about people asking us to do things that are contrary to superannuation law. And one of the things that we've grown up with now, and given that super's been with us now, mandated super's been with us since 94 when Keating did the good thing that he did. We're talking about close to $4 trillion now of funds, and it's just a temptation that's just too big for some operators. And I guess, Michelle, one of the things I wanted to talk to you today about is what superannuation is not meant for. And I guess, given that you're a planner as well as a chartered accountant, what do you think is the big one that steps up as being the biggest red flag when people come into your office and go, hey, I've got this great idea, ...
Yeah, look, one of the things that they hear about a lot is the fact that they can access their superannuation for, let me just call it, spicy investments.
Spicy. Okay.
Spice. So that could be, and look, that's not to say that there might not be some really good potential in whatever the thing is that they're thinking about, but it's something that's a little bit, unusual. Now, there are some unusual things in the superannuation field that you can actually do, but sometimes you have to actually do them in a self-managed fund, because you're not going to have retail funds or industry funds are going to be interested in this spicy investment that you might have come up with, no matter how good it is. So then you start stepping down the track of, okay, well, then is a self-managed fund right for you? Have you actually got the ability to run it? Have you got someone standing next to you helping you with the compliance obligations, all that sort of stuff? But let's assume that we get through those hurdles. Then there's the whole range of questions about what this potential investment is, and therefore whether or not a self-managed fund can do it. So it's interesting. The first thing that comes to mind is obviously various property type arrangements that people might be wanting to get
Yes.
involved in. Um,
Yes.
and there's a whole raft of rules and complexities associated with that. And once again, Ray, you and I could have a whole show just based on that. But
Funny you say that. We actually have one with Services Australia, Centrelink, because they talk about Scam Watch. The other one was the SMSF Association, because their compliance guy said, look, can we come on your show and talk about these one-stop shop real estate deals, because they're killing us because so many people break the law. But I
yes.
digress. Please continue.
So, but see, some of the times it's not even so much that it might be that it's a completely valid thing, and it's not. I mean, I'm with you. Those ones where they get put into a room with oxygen getting pumped into the room, and all the rah rah rah, and let me sell you this thing, is red flags all over the place. But sometimes there are.
I refer to those, rather than a meeting, I call them a revival.
Yes, yes.
I've been
It's
saved.
a bit cultish. But and hopefully those days are behind us. But it's
I
funny how many
don't
times you
think
still
so. I
see them
don't
sort of pop
think
up
so.
from
No.
time to time. And but having said that, now some clients just simply are very married to the concept and the idea of property. It then comes back to, how do we do it properly, and what things to watch out for in what you're trying to achieve. So, for example, things like, we'll have a client come to us and they'll go, hey, I've got this U-Butte property. It's over here. we reckon we'll be able to bulldoze it and put 3 units on it and, make a squillion. Now, number one is that's all well and good if you can fund it from the super fund entirely. Usually that can't be done. Usually they need to borrow to buy the property originally. And then as soon as you've used borrowings to buy the property in the super fund, well, straight away, you can't do a development of that nature. You just can't until such time as that loan is paid off. So these are some of the nuances that people miss or aren't aware of. And sometimes they might go 60% down the road before realising this. So it really does come back to how important it is to actually be talking to someone who knows what they're talking about, has the licensing.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And is not a property spruiker. Because, if you're talking to the property guy, I mean, how many people have gotten tax advice and financial advice from their real estate agent? It's just, they know what they know and they have their place, but do not get super fund advice from a real estate agent. It's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I
it's
guess
complex stuff.
Yeah, the story that I have is I was approached for somebody that wanted to become licensed, and they told me about this process where, mum and dad walks in with an industry super fund, and then 3 months later they walk out with a piece of property and trustees of their own SMSF. I said, wonderful. So who's the financial planner giving them the advice? Oh, no. There's no need for financial advice. We look after everything. I went, yeah, right. And so, ladies and gents, this is the classic example. And, you're nodding wisely there, Michelle, but, we both know that mum and dad with an industry super fund are not going to necessarily be capable, and far too many SMSF trustees that I meet at shows, at conferences, and discussion groups proudly say, hey, I've got my own SMSF, and they run it. But the problem is, little do they understand or know of the intricacies. Do they necessarily have the financial education? But they were told that being in an SMSF was a great way to go. And again, Michelle, I see you nod wisely, but you and I both know it's a complex area of legislation, and you really need to know what you're doing and have some financial nous. And this is what this radio show is all about. Dollars and Making Sense is about education, and it's about letting people know sometimes it's a bit beyond you. Now, we're at that interesting time. We're about half time. You're here on Dollars Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm here with Michelle Griffiths from Tag Financial. We're talking about what not to do with super. We're going to take a short break and be back with you in just a moment. Hi, and thank you for listening to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly radio program about finance, money, and investing on Radio Northern Beaches and nationally on the Community Radio Network around Australia. The views, comments, and opinions aired during our program should not be construed or viewed as financial advice. Any commentary is general advice only and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. You should consider whether the advice is suitable for you and your personal circumstances. If in doubt, you should contact an authorised licensed financial planner. We welcome questions and feedback, and you can get in touch with us via our blog, social media channels, or email. Please search for Dollars and Making Sense in your favourite podcast platform, or check out our blog at otgcapital.com.au/blog. Hi, and welcome back to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm your host, Ray Treverson. I'm here at the microphone with Michelle Griffiths. She's a principal and chartered accountant at Tag Financial Services. Now, Michelle, before we went to the break, we were talking about these awful schemes that people are convinced to go into, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, they all of a sudden become a trustee of their own self-managed super fund, and before they know it, they're embroiled in legislation and day-by-day operations that many of them don't understand. Now, the tax office, and ladies and gents, if you're not aware, the ATO actually administers and regulates the self-managed super fund arena. Now, a lot of people are not necessarily qualified, but they're still conned, I guess, or mesmerized, Michelle, by this idea of early release. When clients come and talk to you about early release, what are some of the things that they're mentioning to you?
In a lot of instances, they might be, well, the main one I've got to say is that they're just trying to make ends meet and potentially pay off their mortgage quicker. And they might be disillusioned with the super fund that they've got. So that might not be necessarily over the most recent times, but certainly in the past. And they see their mortgage, interest rates going up, and they're just looking for a way to get money out a bit earlier. Now, historically, what we would often do, even if they could get their money out of super, that doesn't necessarily mean that they should. But then you've got this concept of people trying to get their money out of super to pay a mortgage off when in actual fact, they might be better off looking at the reverse, slowing down paying the mortgage off and actually put more into super in the lead up to their retirement because of the tax benefits that you get by putting more into super. And then when you've retired, you can then take your lump sum out and maybe pay off the rest of the mortgage. And when you look at the tax benefit of doing it that way, it's a really interesting exercise in actually saying, well, in actual fact, as long as the super fund's performing reasonably well, quite often that's not a bad strategy.
Now, I guess because this is your first time on our show, one of the things I want to ask you, because during COVID, we've been broadcasting for 4 odd years now. Now, during COVID, a couple of commentators and me especially railed against the previous government giving this boondoggle of 2 lots of $10,000 downdrafts out of people's personal super. Did you personally see a lot of that happening in your space?
Didn't see a lot of it. I think that there was one that came across my desk during that time. And I think that comes down to an education thing because most of our clients were really quite well educated on the fact that it's better to actually leave the money in super. So as it comes, and I can see the look on your face, Ray, it all comes back to education because, it's a very short-sighted sort of. Now, having said that, I'm sure that there were circumstances where maybe that was what was required at the time just to get through. But in the majority of instances, most people had the ability to redraw off home loans. They had job seeker payments. There were alternatives out there. So that in the majority of instances, certainly the people that we were talking to, that wasn't their go-to.
Yeah, I just draw breath, and I'm really saddened that the people that are most vulnerable and the people that really shouldn't have touched their super are the ones that did. And they took out their money at a time when the market was at its worst and trying to get back into the market now when it certainly had a very strong rebound in these last number of years. I could easily point the mathematics, but again, I start thinking about my brother-in-law is a teacher, and he used to often joke about the fact that, Ray, you can't teach pigs how to fly. It can't be done. It annoys the hell out of the pig. And it's a really good saying because he used to deal with kids all the time. And he goes, you've got to accept sometimes somebody's just not going to listen to the good words of advice, no matter how good it is. And this is one of those instances where, we read the anecdotal evidence after the drawdowns were done, and far too many of them were buying flat screen tellies and facelifts and Botox injections, or gambling, and even worse. And it's gone and never to be seen again.
And even when the argument was, but I need it to pay my mortgage. If you recall, interest rates were so low at that point, so their mortgage repayments were, you would think at the lowest they could be. And also the banks had in place mechanisms to hold or pause repayments. There was all sorts of other ways that were far more effective to do what needed to be done rather than to sacrifice your superannuation, which is a very, it's the value of time, isn't it? That's the whole nature of superannuation, is it's the time value of money. You have it in there for a long time and it just automatically continues to grow. So they've really stymied that unfortunately, that benefit.
I mean, Keating always made much about the compounding effect of super, and we recently had the COO of Aware Super, lovely lady, talking about the effect of compounding because, again, their super fund, very interestingly, is run by women. And I really enjoy interviewing a lot of women in finance because seriously, there just ain't enough of you guys. And you know, we're entering into an interesting phase, I guess, of world development. We may end up having a female president of the United States. Who knows? Fingers crossed, fingers not. Doesn't matter one way or the other. But I guess from my perspective, I see a very different approach to finance. I see a very different approach to problem solving when I'm dealing with women compared to men. And I think there's some salient lessons on both sides to potentially be looking at. Now, I wanted to move on and talk a little bit more about early release and something called TRIS, Transition to Retirement Income Streams. I'm curious, again, as a financial planner, do you do a lot of work in this space, Michelle?
This tends to be something that I think has its place. I actually think that there are actually some values associated with this one. So basically, what a transition to retirement income stream is. So this is this TRIS.
TRIS, yes. A four-letter acronym rather than a TLA.
There we go, just to throw a spanner in the works. Essentially is like a pension before you're eligible to get a pension, is essentially probably the best way to describe it. So it really serves people who generally are between the ages of 60 and 65. And where it works really well is where they might be saying, okay, I've hit 60, I'm not quite ready to retire, but I really want to pare back how much I'm working. I want to go from 5 days a week to 3 days a week. And I need something just to kind of supplement my income just that little bit to make that possible. And that'll mean that I can actually stay in the working environment for another 5 to 7 years, and then I'll rethink where I'm at. So that basically is how the TRIS is designed to work, and it can work really well. Basically, what it then becomes is literally that income stream coming out to them. If it's post 60, it's still tax-free in their hands, so it can be quite tax effective, but it doesn't afford the tax benefits inside the superannuation fund that a normal full pension would out of a superannuation account. So if it's a full pension, then a set account-based pension is usually what they're called. Basically, the earnings on the assets inside that pension are going to be tax-free. Whereas with a TRIS, you're still paying the 15% earnings tax, if you like, on it as though it was still in accumulation mode. The only difference is it's dripping out some money to you. And there are limits on how much can be dripped out to you, like a maximum of 10% of the value at the beginning of the year. So that's still a fairly significant amount. And we certainly wouldn't be recommending people take that higher amount, because otherwise you're going to really start to diminish your superannuation balance very quickly. So they do have a place. We've actually used them in some instances where people are actually recycling that money. So for example, you take the TRIS out, it's tax-free because you're over 60, but then you basically put it back into super and basically allow yourself to get your super contributions up to the $30,000 amount that you're allowed to claim. So that's a really interesting way of being able to use that as well. So once again, it's about how you use it, and as long as you're using it really strategically and you know why, and that you have seen the longer term impact of it. And that's a really important point, I think, is that you need to be able to understand that, okay, well, yes, I can do this thing now, and that's going to help me for the next 3 years, but what does it mean to me in 10 years' time, 15 years, 20 years' time? And this is probably where being able to have that vision or be able to do some projections on, hey, how long is my money going to last if I do this thing a bit differently? Is it going to be a benefit to me, or is it actually going to put me behind where I otherwise would have been? Now there's an argument to say in that case, sorry, go on.
No, I'm just curious. You said before up to 65, but given the retirement age is now 67, is TRIS now valid out to 67, or is it still at 65?
So 67 is the age for the aged pension eligibility.
Right.
But you can be you only have to get to age 65 to be eligible to have a full pension out of super, even if you're working.
Okay, cool.
So that's the distinction. So you're talking about a super pension versus a Centrelink pension. For a Centrelink pension, you need to be 67. For a super pension, you only need to be 65.
Thank you for passing that
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so there's I've had a number of clients who they couldn't do the wind back of their work commitments sufficiently unless they had that tris in place, in which case that actually works really well because it actually means that instead of them burning themselves out by trying to get through to age 65 working full time when they really don't want to, they can maybe, I'll call it semi-retire at age 60 or 62. And quite often what finishes up happening is that they then have renewed energy and they can actually last and keep working right through till their 70s quite happily and be really productive in the community because they've kind of got their life balance a little bit better. So as I said, it really comes down to what it means for that person in that circumstance and being able to understand the broader effect of it.
Now, I guess, ladies and gents, it makes a really valid point. Michelle's made a really valid point. This is one of the reasons why you need to go and see a financial planner if you need assistance, not just in short-term stuff, but in long-term and visionary, I guess, strategic financial planning. It's not just a short game. You need to be playing the long game as well. Michelle, believe it or not, we're just about out of time. Wow, that went really fast. This is your first time on the show. Look, we've got to have you back. I'd like to talk a little bit more about retirement planning with you, given that that is certainly an area of your expertise. Michelle Griffiths from TAG Financial Services, thanks so kindly for being on Dollars and Making Sense.
It's been great fun. Thank you, Ray. Really appreciate it.
Yes, have a great day.